There's only room for one guitar player in this band, and that's me. So why don't you,
Netflix's movie, The Dirt, made Motley Crue look like lovable troublemakers, but they hid the darkest truths. The movie erased a death that haunted Vince Neil for decades. They covered up domestic violence arrests and a scandal involving stolen tapes that made millions. Tommy Lee didn't just party. He went to jail for assault. The band didn't just fight record labels, they gave up $10 million in a desperate gamble. The real story is much darker than Hollywood wanted you to see. The Netflix movie The Dirt made the start of Motley Crue look like a wild fairy tale, but the truth was far messier and more intense. On January 17, 1981, Nikki Sixx didn't randomly meet Tommy Lee by accident. He had already watched Tommy's band Sweet 19 play live at the Whiskey A Go Go in Los Angeles. Tommy wasn't just a kid with drumsticks. He had been playing clubs for years and was already known on the Sunset Strip. Nicky had a plan. He set up a serious meeting with Tommy at a corner diner on Burbank and Lancashire. He pitched the idea of a crazy new band with fire, makeup, and madness. Tommy was interested, but he didn't want to betray his current bandmates. Their first jam wasn't magical like the movie shows. It ended in an argument and almost a fistfight over drum styles. After Sweet 19 broke up, there were even legal issues over their equipment, and Tommy was stuck in the middle of it. None of this made it into the film. Vince Neil's story was also changed. The movie showed him performing at some pool party, singing a song that hadn't even been released yet. In real life, Tommy Lee spotted Vince performing with his band Rock Candy at the Starwood Club in 1981. That club was packed with real rock fans and bands like Van Halen and Quiet Riot. Tommy and Vince had gone to the same high school in Covina, so Tommy already knew who Vince was. He didn't just stumble across him at some backyard party. The real moment happened under stage lights, not beside a swimming pool. When Vince finally agreed to audition, it didn't happen casually either. It was in a tiny garage, no pool, no sunshine, no nonsense. He sang AC/DC covers and hit every note. That's what convinced the band. They had already fired their first singer, a guy named Odin Peterson, who they said looked too much like a hippie. He had even recorded the first demos. Vince listened to those demos before deciding to give the new band a chance. But even after nailing the audition, Vince didn't just jump in. He wanted $1,000 up front. That was a huge amount in 1981, especially for three broke musicians. Nikki Sixx was furious. He said if Vince took the money and ran, there would be hell to pay. The argument got so heated, they thought it might fall apart before it even began. But Vince saw the chance to leave Rock Candy, which was turning soft, and take a risk on this new group. At that time, Vince's girlfriend was begging him not to join. She had heard about the band's wild behavior. She was scared of Nicky's heroin use and the chaos surrounding Tommy and Mick. She warned Vince they were dangerous, and she was right. Not long after, the band started spinning out of control, with drugs, arrests, and destruction. In 1984, Vince would crash a car while drunk, killing his friend Razzle Dingley from Hanoi Rocks. His girlfriend's warning became reality. The movie skips the long chase. Tommy had to beg Vince for months to join. Vince said no over and over again. He didn't trust them. They looked shady. But when Rock Candy finally broke up, Vince had no other band. He gave in. If that had never happened, Motley Crue might not have existed. The movie also makes it look like Elektra Records showed up and signed the band instantly. But Tom Zutaut, the A&R guy, actually chased them for months. It started in April 1982 when he saw a huge line outside the Whiskey A Go Go, and the sign said, "Motley Crue sold out." He checked out their album at Licorice Pizza, a record store that had mannequins holding their cover. and chains, whips, and even underwear from a girl Vince had just been with. Zutaut pretended he was from Elektra and talked his way into the club. That night changed everything. On August 4, 1982, the band played a huge show at Santa Monica Civic. Over 3,500 people were there. They lit their instruments on fire and set off 32 smoke bombs during the song "Knock 'Em Dead, Kid." That was when Elektra finally got serious. But even then, Motley Crue didn't act like desperate kids. They were already running their own label, Lethier Records. On November 10, 1981, they had released 900 copies of Too Fast for Love themselves. By January 1982, they had a deal with Green World Records and had pressed 20,000 more copies. They sold so many so fast that record labels couldn't ignore them. Virgin Records even offered them $100,000 with $10,000 in cash up front. But the band turned it down. They didn't want to work with a company based in another city. They picked Elektra for less money because it was in Los Angeles. They were smart. They were hustlers. Before the record deal, they were making money from bootleg merch. They sold gloves, posters, and everything they could through mail order and at concerts. One record store even painted Vince's face on the wall. Their manager, Alan Kaufman, mortgaged his house 3 times and spent $300,000 of his own money just to keep the band going. None of this made it into the movie either. And then came the battles with the label. Elektra said the original mix of Too Fast for Love wasn't good enough. They brought in a big-time producer, Roy Thomas Baker, who had worked with Queen. Vince had to re-record all the vocals at a house on Sunset Drive. They removed songs like Stick to Your Guns and Toast of the Town because of copyright and publishing drama. Nicky didn't want people like Kim Fowley or Rodney Bingenheimer making money off them. The label wanted a cleaner sound. The band wanted control. That tension started before the ink even dried. Their shows kept causing trouble, too. On Halloween in 1982, during a show at Concord Pavilion, Nicky's jumpsuit caught fire after touching a candle. Firefighters had to rush the stage. They got fined $1,000. On New Year's Eve, December 31st, 1982, they got fined another $1,000 for blasting 20-foot fire mortars inside the Santa Monica Civic. They didn't care. They kept doing it. Tom Zutaut had to bribe club owners just to let them play because so many venues wanted them banned. On December 8, 1984, Vince Neil got behind the wheel after drinking way too much. His blood alcohol level was 0.117, which was 70% over the legal limit back then in California. He wasn't just tipsy, he was hammered. And yet, he still grabbed the keys to his flashy orange-red De Tomaso Pantera to make a quick trip to buy more booze. He ended up speeding through Redondo Beach at 65 miles per hour, in a zone where the speed limit was just 25. As he tried to swerve around a parked fire truck, he lost control. The car crashed hard. Neither he nor his friend Razzle was wearing a seatbelt. It was the worst timing possible, because that day also happened to be the very first day of America's National Drunk Driving Awareness Week. In just a few seconds, what should have been a short drive turned into a moment that shattered multiple lives forever. Razzle, whose real name was Nicholas Dingley, was only 24. He was the drummer for the Finnish rock band Hanoi Rocks. He died on the spot. His head injuries were so severe, doctors said he likely died the moment of impact. He was pronounced dead at 7:12 p.m. at South Bay Hospital. When the car crashed, his body flew into Vince's lap, surrounded by shattered liquor bottles. Vince held him as he died. But Razzle wasn't the only victim. In the other car, 18-year-old Lisa Hogan suffered massive injuries. Her brain was so badly damaged, she ended up in a coma for a month and later developed psychomotor seizures. Both of her legs and one arm were broken. The other passenger, 20-year-old Daniel Smithers, also suffered permanent brain damage and a broken leg. Their lives were changed in an instant. None of them would ever fully recover. After the crash, things got even weirder. Vince ran away from the scene for a short while before coming back. People nearby said he was laughing, but it wasn't out of cruelty. It was the kind of laugh that comes from total shock. In his own book, Vince later said everything felt unreal. He remembered holding Razzle and seeing the booze bottles scattered everywhere. One of the cops said they stank of alcohol, and Vince admitted that of course they did. Razzle had been holding a whole lap full of bottles. Vince said he felt woozy, like he was in a movie with no sound. He was arrested at the station for drunk driving and vehicular manslaughter. But the part that shocked everyone came next. He was let out on just $2,500 bail. For killing one man and permanently hurting two others, that was all he had to pay to walk free that night. Almost a year later, in September 1985, Vince Neil stood in court waiting for his punishment. Most people expected something serious, but Judge Edward Hines Jr. gave him just 30 days in jail. And Vince didn't even serve the full time. He only did 15 days because of good behavior. He also got 5 years of probation and had to do 200 hours of community service. The only real financial hit was a $2.6 million payment to the victims and to Razzle's estate. But even that came with a catch. The judge let Vince postpone his jail time so he could go on tour with Motley Crue to earn the money. Vince later said he was just glad he could take care of the victims. But the way he said it, "If I'm not out on the road, I can't make any money," sounded cold, like touring was more important than justice. In the end, the whole thing sent a message that shocked the public. If you were rich and famous, even killing someone while driving drunk didn't mean real consequences. In 1997, Motley Crue made a decision that almost no band would ever dare make. They were owed $12 million from Elektra Records, money they could have taken and walked away with. But they didn't. Instead, they gave up $10 million of that money so they could take back control of their own music. They gave up a fortune in the middle of their lowest point just to own their master recordings. Their managers and lawyers thought it was insane, but the band didn't care. They trusted their manager Alan Kovacs, and they believed their music would be worth more someday. They didn't just want money now. They wanted power later. Back then, it looked like a bad call. Their album sales had crashed. Vince Neil was gone. Their tour with John Corabi had bombed. Elektra had spent somewhere between $40 and $50 million expecting hits. But when Vince was replaced, the label said one cold sentence: "Not what we paid for." Their 1994 album barely went gold. The tour was a mess. John Corabi later admitted it flat out. The tour was a disaster. No one came, no one cared. That's what triggered the whole crisis. Elektra had lost faith. Motley Crue had lost momentum, and money was running out fast. Things got so bad that Nikki Sixx, the band's founder and main songwriter, had to pawn off his own instruments just to pay his bills. He went from playing in stadiums to wondering how he'd keep the lights on. That was the reality in the mid-90s. It wasn't about fame or art anymore. It was about survival. And that desperation made him fight harder. He didn't care what the lawyers said. He wanted control of the band's catalog no matter what it cost. So they came up with a plan. If Elektra didn't want to let them go, they'd make life unbearable until the label gave up. According to people close to the situation, the band made it their mission to become the worst group Elektra ever had to deal with. They'd show up late, start arguments, ignore calls, and make everything difficult. It was a slow, painful war, and it worked. Elektra finally gave in just to be rid of them. They walked away. But more importantly, Motley Crue walked away with their masters. They were now one of the only major bands in the world to own both their publishing and their music. That changed everything. They created their own label called Motley Records. They partnered with Beyond Music. They had full control. And when Vince Neil returned in 2000, they were ready. Their reunion tour was funded by their own music, not a label, not a loan. They had built their own financial engine using the catalog they fought so hard to get back. That one decision in 1997, giving up $10 million, ended up becoming the smartest thing they ever did. In December 2021, they sold their music catalog to BMG for $150 million. Each band member received $37.5 million. That meant their $10 million sacrifice turned into a $140 million gain. That's a 400% return on their risk. They didn't just survive, they won. But while all that was happening on the business side, their personal lives were falling apart. Especially Tommy Lee. On New Year's Eve in 1994, he met Pamela Anderson in a nightclub while high on ecstasy. He didn't shake her hand. He licked her face from chin to temple. They talked on the phone for 6 weeks. Then, out of nowhere, Tommy flew to Cancun, where she was working. They met in person, and within 96 hours, he proposed using his pinky ring. They got married the next day on the beach, February 19th, 1995. No rings, just tattoos of each other's names on their fingers. Their honeymoon would end up becoming one of the biggest scandals of the decade. Their private sex tape was stolen in 1996 and sold online. It made over $75 million in its first year. But Tommy and Pamela never saw a single dollar. In 2002, they were awarded $740,000 each by a court, but it was too late. The company responsible had already shut down. Its owner ran off to Bangkok to escape FBI investigations. The damage was done. Their tape had become one of the most pirated videos in history. Then came the breaking point. On February 24, 1998, Tommy was arrested at their Malibu home after allegedly kicking Pamela while she was holding their baby. He was charged with felony spousal abuse. Child abuse charges were dropped later, but the damage couldn't be erased. Pamela filed for divorce 2 days later. In court, Tommy pleaded no contest. He was sentenced to 6 months in jail, given 3 years of probation, forced into anger management, ordered to stay 100 yards away from Pamela, and banned from drinking or using drugs. The police report listed a broken finger, torn fingernail, and red marks across her back. He was also only allowed weekly supervised visits with his sons. Just when it couldn't get worse, Pamela made a public accusation in 2002 that Tommy had given her hepatitis C. She said he never told her he had it. She said they shared tattoo needles while getting matching tattoos, and that's how she got infected. The disease could have killed her. Doctors told her she might only live 10 more years. At first, Tommy's team denied it, but years later, in 2015, Pamela admitted that Tommy had gotten cured first and had been pushing her to get treatment too. Both of them eventually beat the disease, but the anger and lawsuits kept building. The film The Dirt showed none of this. Pamela isn't in the movie. Their sons, Brandon and Dylan, are erased completely. The movie skipped over the arrests, the sex tape, the custody battles, and the lawsuits. But those events weren't minor side stories. They were the biggest headlines about Motley Crue for most of the 1990s. More people read about their scandals than listened to their music. The film turned Tommy Lee into a wild but lovable troublemaker, skipping over the darker truth that shaped the band's story. Behind the scenes, everything was falling apart financially. The lawsuits from the sex tape alone cost Tommy over $400,000. To try and control the damage, they signed a deal with the same company that stole the tape, thinking it would just be a one-time stream. But the moment they signed, the tape exploded across the internet, and in video stores everywhere. By the time they sued, the company was gone, and so was the money. Tommy couldn't tour while serving time. That meant no income. Meanwhile, the legal bills from his domestic violence case, the custody fight, and the copyright lawsuits kept growing. They nearly went broke. He had no way to stop the bleeding. This is what the world didn't see. Behind the makeup and fire and loud guitars, there was a band clawing its way back from collapse. They weren't just fighting labels. They were fighting courtrooms, diseases, public shame, and their own demons. The $10 million they gave up in 1997 wasn't just a business move. It was their last bet. And somehow, against all odds, it saved them. Go back a few years to 1989, and you'll find the Moscow Music Peace Festival. It was supposed to be about unity, but it turned into a full-on betrayal. Doc McGee, who managed Motley Crue and Bon Jovi at the same time, broke the rules. Everyone agreed. No pyrotechnics. But during Bon Jovi's set, fireworks exploded across Lenin Stadium. McGee had given them special treatment while denying Crue the one thing they were famous for. Tommy Lee saw it all happen and lost it. He punched McGee in the chest and told him he was finished, screaming that he could go manage the Chipmunks. Even Skid Row's Sebastian Bach remembered Tommy downing a whole bottle of vodka before confronting McGee. That one night destroyed the trust. Motley Crue refused to even fly home on the same plane as their manager. That was the end. But there was another figure always in the background, Doug Thaler. From 1982 to 1992, he was the guy who kept the band out of jail, away from lawsuits, and functioning. When Vince Neil killed Hanoi Rocks drummer Razzle in a drunk driving crash in 1984, Thaler worked closely with lawyer Michael Nass-Satir to spin the story. They told the court that it was a business meeting, so the insurance company would cover the $2.7 million in settlements. Because of Thaler's strategy, Neil got just 30 days in jail. Thaler even testified in court himself. And yet, when Netflix made The Dirt, they completely erased him like he never existed. Doc McGee had his own secrets too. On December 23, 1987, Nikki Sixx overdosed and literally died for 2 minutes. Slash and Robin Crosby were there. Sally McLaughlin tried to keep Sixx alive with mouth-to-mouth. Paramedics had to inject adrenaline into his chest to bring him back. People thought he was gone. Vince Neil even got calls from reporters asking for obituary quotes, but McGee stepped in and told everyone to say Nikki had the flu. He kept that lie going for years. What The Dirt didn't show was how McGee was using the band's money to fund his private jets and expensive lifestyle. He was caught up in one of the biggest drug trafficking cases of the 1980s. Between 1982 and 1984, he was part of a conspiracy that smuggled over 1 million pounds of cocaine and marijuana into the U.S. He was caught, pled guilty in 1988, and got a suspended 5-year prison sentence. As part of his punishment, he had to do 3,000 hours of community service and paid $250,000 to anti-drug causes. The Moscow Peace Festival wasn't a charity concert, it was court-ordered. And while he avoided prison, McGee used his clients like pawns, all while secretly draining their money. The movie also left out the dark truth about Tommy Lee and Heather Locklear's relationship. They met in 1985 at an REO Speedwagon concert. Tommy actually thought she was someone else on their first call. But soon after, they were married in a huge ceremony with 500 guests. He even wore a white leather tux. Their marriage lasted from 1986 to 1994, but behind the scenes there were domestic violence reports and fights that never made it into the movie. Years later, the same patterns would show up in Tommy's relationship with Pamela Anderson, leading to his 1998 arrest and jail sentence for domestic assault. Then there's the story no one wants to talk about. Vince Neil's daughter, Skylar. She was just 4 years old when she died from Wilms's tumor on August 15, 1995. At first, doctors thought it was appendicitis, but during surgery, they found a massive tumor wrapped around her organs. It weighed 6.5 pounds, the same as her birth weight. She went through 6 surgeries, chemotherapy, and radiation, but nothing worked. Vince completely fell apart. He would stay at the hospital all day, then drink until he blacked out at Moonshadows in Malibu. The movie didn't just get the year of her birth wrong, it erased the agony her death caused and how it wrecked Neil emotionally and broke the band even further. Mick Mars was also going through silent hell. He had been dealing with ankylosing spondylitis since he was 14, but by the early 2000s, it nearly killed him. He was in so much pain he was taking up to 45 Advil a day and mixing it with heavy drinking and drugs like OxyContin and Vicodin. At one point, he was hallucinating reptiles at the foot of his bed. Nikki Sixx had to move him into his house and feed him with a spoon. By 2013, Mars couldn't even turn his head. The disease shrunk his height by 3 inches and twisted his spine. But he never used a cane or a wheelchair. He just kept going. When Tommy Lee finally left the band in 1999, he announced it live on KROQ radio, saying he couldn't do another year of it. He had just done 6 months in jail for hitting Pamela Anderson. The band quickly brought in Randy Castillo from Ozzy's band. They didn't even hold auditions. He recorded the new Tattoo album in 2000, which brought back the classic sound, but fans were divided. Right before their tour with Megadeth and Anthrax, Castillo collapsed at a club. Doctors found an ulcer and later a tumor in his jaw. It was cancer. He fought it off for a while, but it returned. On March 26, 2002, he died at 51. That was the moment Motley Crue officially went on hiatus for the first time since 1981. The real story of Motley Crue isn't what you saw in the dirt. It's darker, more complicated, and filled with betrayals most fans never heard about.